Tensions between the U.S. and China have been high in the South China Sea. The U.S. Navy has increased its deployment activities in the region, particularly since the beginning of July. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently announced a formal rejection of the U.S.'s stance of not taking sides on the maritime disputes in the South China Sea, accusing Beijing of conducting a campaign of bullying, quote-unquote. What exactly is prompting the U.S. to ramp up its military activities in this part of the world, and how does this approach fit into the overall U.S. strategy towards China? I'm pleased to be joined from Shanghai by Professor Shen Dingli at the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University, and from Washington, D.C. by Dr. Ivan Eland, a senior fellow at the Independent Institute, a think tank. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. But first, let's take a look at the different stances from both sides. On July the 13th, the U.S. State Department laid out its new position on maritime claims in the South China Sea, saying the world will not allow Beijing to treat the South China Sea as its maritime empire. America stands with our Southeast Asian allies and partners in protecting their sovereign rights to offshore resources, consistent with their rights and obligations under international law. On Saturday, China's ambassador to the United States, Cui told CNN that without outside interference, the situation in the region was cooling down and was quite stable. Unfortunately, countries like the U.S. are trying very hard to intervene to strengthen their military presence in the region. The intensity and frequency is so high, but ironically, the United States is not yet party to the Convention on the Law of the Sea. So let's get to the discussion directly. Dr. Eland, U.S. aircrafts have been spotted near Guangdong province for a third time in a week, and two U.S. aircraft carriers have conducted dual aircraft carrier exercises in the South China Sea twice since July already. Exactly how do you describe the U.S.'s approach here? What are they planning to do?
Well, I think they are. It's rare to have two aircraft carriers there. It's not unprecedented, but it's very rare. It hasn't happened in a few years. And I think the U.S. is ramping up these freedom of navigation missions. And it is an election here in the United States. And so countries do take that into account when they deal with the U.S. Usually they, lay low during the election year, because presidents in the past, the historical record shows that U.S. presidents have ramped up this type of thing during election year. But I also have to say that the Chinese historical and legal claims to 90% of the South China Sea are not very valid, and other countries I think have a valid, they have valid claims as well. And so I think the United States should get out of there and let the countries in the region solve the problem themselves, because it's not really a U.S. problem in my view. But I think that there are other countries do have some claims against on the South China Sea as well. And I think it's also countries are making the mistake of treating these resources as if we're in the 19th and 20th centuries, when resources were everything. Now, the modern economy and everything, I don't think we should be fighting over resources under the sea.
Okay, let me go to Professor Shen. Just now, Dr. Eland talked about China's claim being over 90% of the South China Sea. Is that accurate way of the interpretation of the Chinese stance, first of all? And secondly, how has China been reacting to the moves by the United States?
Well, I think the U.S. recent claim that China is claiming 90% of the entire South China Sea area for sovereign or economic interest is not right. Actually, China is saying for those water under China's sovereign, like 12 nautical miles, these are absolutely China's sovereign rights. Then there are some extended rights, like 200 nautical miles, China's EEZ, and beyond that, maybe there are some remaining high sea. China has a stake as any other country would have a stake. The only dispute is for China's 9-dash line claim, some of it the far end of it may overlap with some of other ring South China Sea countries 200 nautical mile EEZ. That's the only dispute, not dispute over the most of the South China Sea area. So I think first, the U.S. claim, Secretary of State Pompeo's claim is not right.
So how has China been reacting to the U.S. increased military presence in this region since recent weeks?
Well, I think China is urging the U.S. to understand China's position correctly, not to misjudging China, and not to change its long-time held position, which is a neutral position, not to take a side. Now U.S. is shifting its position to be, in China's view, a biased position with some other claims of South China Sea and not with China. China doesn't care U.S. position is not with China, but China does care U.S. has taken a biased position, which is to embolden some other claims which may fuel the tension in the region. That is irresponsible.
All right. A highly respected expert on Asian studies, Ezra Vogel, said recently that there is unfortunately the possibility of a military conflict between China and the United States. A small friction, he said, could quickly escalate and, if not contained, could lead to disastrous consequences, and every country in the region will be a loser. Dr. Eland, your thoughts on the likelihood of a military conflict being sparked off because of the recent development in that part?
Yes, I think what you just read is correct. The problem that we have is I don't think there's going to be an intentional war between China and the United States in the naval sphere. But, you know, there's incidents all the time that happen not only between the U.S. and China, but between China and other countries in that area. And I think, you know, it's best that everyone negotiate these things, and I think they can be negotiated. And I think it should be peaceful. Now, of course, when we have all sorts of naval vessels from many countries there, including the United States, who really doesn't have a dog in the fight, I disagree that the U.S. has been neutral. It's been officially neutral, but I think it's supporting you know, Vietnam, Philippines, etc., against China. So, but I just don't see why we need a far-forward naval presence in the South China Sea for our own security, and that's the key for U.S. military should be where our own security requires it to be, and I'm not sure South China Sea is where we need to be, and I think it is causing increased tensions. It's not the only cause of tensions in that area, because we have had naval incidents between other countries, but certainly you know, the U.S. Cranking up its rhetoric and exercises is not very helpful at the current time.
Well, the United States says, as I quoted in the beginning of the show, it will stand with its Southeast Asian allies and partners in protecting their sovereign rights. So, Professor Shen, what does that mean for China and ASEAN countries who have been trying to solve disputes among themselves, such as by negotiating a code of conduct in the region?
As we know that China has been negotiating with ASEAN as a grouping for years, and possibly the two sides may cut a deal for a permanent, peaceful handling of the so-called South China Sea COC Code of Conduct. Therefore, you know that this 10 ASEAN countries as grouping is willing to discuss with China and to make institutional arrangement that they are not going to use confrontational means, military means to settle dispute, despite the dispute. But the U.S. is offering some alternative choice. They may not choose COC to peacefully coexist with China. They may expect U.S. military backing. This would make the temperature, which is already lowering, to be high again. And this may possibly embolden some claims to opt for the U.S. backing as an alternative policy with China.
I would like to go a bit further along that, because ASEAN has become China's largest trading partner in the first 3 months of 2020, surpassing both the EU and the United States. So against this backdrop, how will the great majority of ASEAN countries in that part of the world especially welcome the U.S. gesture. Just now we talked about the Vietnamese Foreign Affairs Ministry put out a statement saying they welcome countries' position on what they call the East Sea issues, which are consistent with international law, but without elaborating further. So is countries such as like Vietnam going to be emboldened by the U.S.'s position? How about other countries such as the Philippines? Professor Shen, once again.
For Vietnam, it's quite likely because Vietnam does not think China's sovereign claim over Nam Sa and Chi Sa, the so-called Spartan and Praso, as legitimate. Therefore, they do need an outside hegemon like the U.S. To back up Vietnam's so-called international law kind of a claim. And Vietnam may feel maybe misguided by U.S. And actually, U.S. would not back Vietnam at a time of need. But Vietnam may be misguided. For Philippines knows that the U.S. is not very much likely to back them. So President Duterte is more willing to work out with China in a peaceful and diplomatic approach. So different countries may take a U.S. offer in a different way.
Well, some people are saying, Dr. Eland, some people are saying, as you also mentioned as well, this is an election year, and some people are saying the whole thing is all part of President Trump's re-election campaign. Your thoughts? Do you think this is a short-term tactic or long-term strategy, regardless who will be the next president?
Well, I think the U.S., unfortunately, will continue to be in that area, but I think the next president, whoever it is, ought to rethink that. And of course, Trump on many avenues is bashing China now because he needs an enemy for the election, I would say. And I think this is not helpful, certainly. And I think the United States really doesn't have a dog in the fight as its official neutrality position, which I don't think is really neutral, but its official neutrality position indicates that it doesn't have a dog in the fight. So what should happen, in my view, I don't think we're going to get anywhere with the ASEAN Code of Conduct. I think that the countries affected by this, because there's some ASEAN countries that are not affected by this, but the countries that are affected by this dispute should all get together, have an ad hoc group where they can talk about it, and solve it themselves. That's what I think they should do. This is a regional dispute. This is not a global dispute or anything else.
However,
so that's what I think should happen.
However, the UK, for instance, is also making its presence felt, right? It had sent military ships to this part of the waters, and it's planning to send HMS Queen Elizabeth next year into the South China Sea. I want to bring us back finally to 1941, when U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill released the Atlantic Charter. Dr. Eland, they defined the goals for the post-World War, Second World War world order, and they expressed a respect for the right of all people to choose their form of government. They respect, they hope to see peace established and the abandonment of the use of force. So have the two allies abandoned or deviated from those principles that they set up together?
Well, I think this was the Atlantic Charter was made in 1941, as you point out, to contrast with the Nazis in Germany and the autocratic regimes in Italy and Japan and the Axis. And I think, of course, these are an echo of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. So the United States has reiterated a lot of these points over time. It has not always, in practice, sponsored self-determination, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, and as far as the British go, I don't think they should be there anymore either. It smacks of colonialism, the old colonial arrangements that we had, that the British are involved in this as well. So I think both countries, both Britain and the U.S., should desist from being in the region. And I think the countries, as I said before, should solve it. The countries concerned with this dispute, not other countries in the region or whatever, just the countries in the dispute, in the region that have the dispute should get together and work it out. This is not something that should be that difficult to work out. They need to share the resources, I would say, in this region.
Yeah, well, I hope your voices are shared by more people in the United States. I'm not sure, but it's good to hear your insights, Dr. Eland, and of course, Professor Shen as well from Fudan University.